Good morning, everyone. In terms of my path, I would honestly say I probably started before LinkedIn was actually a thing. I actually got started through an internship. And I got started through an internship in undergrad with a friend of mine. I think we were taking like a macro or a microeconomics course together. And he was working at the time for the Buffalo Common Council in one of the district offices. And he goes, you know what, you should consider interning in our office. I think you would be a good fit.
My path was very similar to Mark's in that I started with an unpaid internship, multiple unpaid internships. We had the opportunity to do an internship, and a lot of my colleagues in my classes were doing like Fisher Price, Rich's Products, and it was a good fit for them, but it wasn't a good fit for me. So I found an internship with the Elmwood Village Association, and that changed everything I wanted to do. I learned so much there, and I was fascinated by the way that the local councilmen were working with them, working with residents, working with business owners, just to make the neighborhood better.
Long story short, I moved to Buffalo 2013. Still really didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew that I wanted to be a social change advocate. I knew that I wasn't happy with the landscape, whether it's environmentally. I knew that there was definitely gaps in the social justice system, in housing, employment, the economic sector, you name it. So with that, it's really just kind of figuring out what to do next. So being part of programs like the one you're in today is a stepping stone. You're going to have an opportunity to talk to folks that are doing and part of the social change, and then you can figure out how you might tailor your skill sets. I literally just Googled internships in city government, and Urban Fellows program came up. Honestly, it was the first link that came up. I submitted an application in the mayor's office. Fortunately, I was offered an opportunity. Again, like Mark, it was an unpaid position. It was for 1 year. Go for them. Just because an internship is not paid, do not let that deter you submitting an application. A lot of the really good opportunities are actually not paid.
I kind of just cold started volunteering on campaigns. There were a couple opportunities to be like a paid walker. There were a couple opportunities to just show up and knock on doors for people, and I started doing all that. And then before my senior year of college, I was introduced to State Senator Tim Kennedy. So he was running against 28-year incumbent who was a Democrat. So there were a lot of Democrats that were mad at him for running. And then he was the Republican was a very strong candidate. He was a pretty effective Republican assemblyman who represented some of the South towns here. So it was an uphill climb. And I guess because we took the chance to get involved on a campaign that was a bit of a long shot, and then he ended up winning, he didn't have necessarily a job here in Western New York that I would fit into. But he said, I am going to need somebody in Albany, and I don't know anybody out there. Would you be willing to move out there and help run my Albany office?
So I decided to do New York City Teaching Fellows in New York City, and that was a whirlwind. Graduated in May, had my own class in September. And I did that for 3 years in a school in Sunset Park. I loved it, and it was a struggle, and it was difficult in either every emotion possible. But I thought to myself, maybe I'm not the best person for students who really need, for what they really need. And so really I answered an ad to work with Cornell. It was actually kind of a long-term internship, really, to be an associate in this office. I've been working for Cornell for 11 years and really appreciate the things that we can do for Cornell University and the students. And then also we try and help organizations that come to us. We want research and rigorous debate to be happening within our governments, and we try and facilitate that.
I started kind of in the political sphere of things. Policy and public service were things that I kind of knew were out there, but to me the fun was always campaigns. Started as a 10-year-old, going door to door with my father, handing out literature for local elections, trying to get people to vote. I remember my freshman fall year, we took a trip down to Pittsburgh to campaign for John Kerry, who was running for president at the time. And that's when it really started opening my eyes to the impact that policy has on people's lives. I would talk with these kind of blue collar, lower middle income people who we try to sell on the economic side of things, and then it would hit me that all they want to talk about is abortion or gun rights or things like that. I got an internship on Capitol Hill that things really started connecting into what public policy does to kind of connect with individual people and to help individual people. Interned for 2 years, 2 summers on Capitol Hill, led to a job. Right after Cornell, fresh out of Cornell, I was working for Congressman Mike McNulty.
Was there a barrier that forced you to pivot for the best, or that you just took as a lesson learned and had to keep moving forward?
I'm constantly reminded there are definitely far more men in government than women. There's also far less women of color in governments. There's far less women of color that are Muslim in governments. I'm pretty much, it's easy to know when I'm there. It's hard to miss me because I'm very extinct. I look very different, but I use that to my advantage. So when I am there, I make sure I'm seen, not just physically, but for up here. I'm qualified, so that's important. I try to make sure I represent others, and I carry myself well. So part of the challenge, of course, is just oftentimes men dominating a lot of the leadership positions. Currently, in my position, I oversee 18 staff, and many of them are taller than me, many of them are older than me. So sometimes taking on a leadership role or being looked at as that senior staff, when you're not the typical senior staff, if you don't fit that typical biased image, it can be a bit of a challenge. So when you come into a room, making sure your presence is well known, and then take pride in that. If you are an engineer, say you're an engineer. If you're a social scientist, say I'm the social scientist. Don't shy away from those titles because you've earned those degrees.
It started when I transitioned from the city council to the Senate. I was probably one of the, if not the youngest chief of staff, probably almost ever. So managing, a multitude of offices and staff, including individuals old enough to be my parents, was quite a transition. Learning Albany was an art. One of my colleagues, who was also a chief of staff for a senator from downstate, kind of pulled me to a side and kind of served as a informal mentor. And some of his first advice to me, or words to me when I came, was like, you're kind of like an anomaly. Like, you're coming in basically at the top. So you have people who have spent their entire careers in government, whether it's in politics, the legislature, wherever, and they're trying to aspire to where you are. And you're already there, and you're only 24. So what you have to keep in mind is the fact that not everyone is necessarily going to have your best intentions at heart. So, choose your friends wisely. Politics and government is a game of just everything.
As mistakes are going to happen. People will make mistakes. My biggest piece of advice is just be honest. Not about the mistake you made, but be honest in meetings. Be honest with what you can deliver. Be honest on time. Just be honest about the facts of your organization. If you need to change something, you change something. But be honest and responsive, and then your reputation will follow you.
So I guess we all know that in politics things don't always go the way you want, and I imagine that when you're working on certain projects and you're very invested in them, that kind of defeat is very difficult. So my question is, how do you deal with that type of defeat and stay in public service?
I think most of us that have served in any sort of legislative capacity can say that we've all introduced legislation that we felt was great, was going to have a great impact on, society, or, just locally within a neighborhood or a community that it was intended for. And in some cases, things don't go according to plan. In most situations, legislation is just out of our control. We have legislation for which the Assemblywoman will speak on later when she arrives, for legalizing recreational marijuana. Didn't come up for a vote yet. There's been a lot of movement on the issue within the last year or so. It's continuing to gain support and popularity. We're hopeful something happens next year. We were hopeful something might happen this year, but we're still optimistic. We're still very supportive.
So I'll just add, a lot of the work that I do is not necessarily policy day-to-day, but more of the constituent outreach and communications with people who live sometimes in the farthest part of our district, all the way down in Lakeview. And I think part of staying motivated to come in and do it every day and feel good about doing it every day is analyzing it and figuring out what went right and what went wrong, and just being very honest about what you could have done better and what you can change for next time, but also celebrating what went right, how successful it was. I mean, I've had events where there's 100 people there, everyone loved it, it's by all measures a success. And then other events where like 3 people showed up and I was like, oh God, what did I do wrong? Why did this not work out the way we thought it would? So I think just taking the time afterwards to debrief and figure out what you can do better for next time just helps you keep going and doing it.
You can't let yourself get caught up in what's failure is. You either have to use it for motivation kind of going forward to keep going to change things. Like Mark mentioned, marijuana. I mean, where marijuana was 5 years ago is nothing where it is now. And if you kind of got it up in your head 5 years ago that, all right, it's a failure, it didn't happen, we wouldn't be where we are today if people didn't, double down and say, this is a good idea, let's keep going on this. One, you have other stuff to do in other areas. You make sure that, you're still reaching those areas. But two, you don't lose sight of what needs to be done going forward, and you just kind of recommit, double down, go forward. And then, things that don't happen right away doesn't mean it won't happen eventually. So you just kind of have to keep on going from there.
Hi, so for those who work for campaigns, many of you have alluded to that Albany or Washington, D.C. is kind of in a bubble from constituent issues. So, and since you guys are often on the front line between elected officials and the citizens that vote for them, how do you try to make sure that citizens have maximum input when making decisions?
I think first and foremost, it's always engaging the community. I mean, I heard some of the people you guys work for, Western New York Women's Foundation, PPG, Western New York Law Center. I mean, a lot of the organizations you work for, before there's any sort of an idea going out there, our office will, have collaborative efforts with childcare, Western New York Women's Foundation. We'll be reaching out to them. The Law Center, there's a unpaid housing code that was added on to the tax levy to help go after slumlords. That's something the Western New York Law Center was involved with. So I think maximum input is to make sure you're engaging the people at all levels, whether it's kind of the campaign side to go out and make sure that these groups, you're advocating for them, or if it's from a policy side, making sure whatever you're writing together is something that, they actually think does benefit the community. Because you're right, there can be a bubble, I can write a piece of legislation that would pass in Albany and everyone in Albany would like, but that doesn't mean that it actually truly affects people back here in Buffalo. So, unless you're going out there and talking to them, talking to these groups, trying to get the feedback, you're never really going to have something that helps everyone. And also, at the end of the day, then helps the person you work for, because you're out there helping the people of the community themselves.
A lot of times, as Rick said, it's just engaging with residents, whether it's block clubs, whether it's going to other meetings, whether it's literally just having an open door policy and people stopping in the office. Members will tell you, and us as staff will tell you, we don't have all the answers. So a lot of times we end up getting them from organizations such as yourselves, advocacy groups, block clubs and residents that come up and say, hey, you know what, have you guys ever considered doing something like this? And it's like, you know what, for whatever reason, I don't know why we haven't, but that's a great idea, so let's run with it.
But getting to know the ropes and how things work in Albany, in DC, at the local, county, or community level is really important to forward the work that you're doing.
Who needs interns?
Always.
Okay.
Always.
Good to know. We have a couple minutes for networking after this. I think that in today's world, it's easy for us to feel demoralized or defeated. But thanks to all of you here today and sharing your work, I know I'm genuinely inspired and energized with the confidence, humility, and capability that you have all shown to us today.